She came to expose them, but danger was already waiting. Rebekah drove along the sun-scorched highways of West Texas, the endless desert stretching on both sides like a flattened canvas of dust, sagebrush, and heat waves shimmering in the distance. The steering wheel vibrated against her palms, transmitting the grit of the road. She didn't just drive. She monitored the asphalt for fresh tire tracks or discarded debris that didn't belong. Her mission functioned on a knife's edge: dismantle a human trafficking pipeline embedded within the Border Patrol without triggering a departmental alarm. She was a phantom in the system, tasked with collecting evidence that would hold up in a federal court while ensuring that any collateral lives, like those trapped in the crossfire of corruption, were shielded from the fallout. The cameras embedded in her glasses, the tiny discreet microphones sewn into her coat, the inconspicuous button recording devices, all linked to encrypted cloud servers that she could access remotely, functioned flawlessly in tests, but she could not afford complacency. One slip, one misstep, one distracted glance could compromise everything. She scanned the horizon for vehicles, noting the heat haze, tracking distant dust clouds for any movement inconsistent with wind and traffic patterns. Every road junction, every side street, every potential exit had been cataloged in her mind, plotted on her maps, memorized in order of priority. The small town she approached appeared quiet, its low buildings and uneven streets almost timeless, a place where strangers were noticed and remembered. The bar at the edge of town, a dim structure with neon flickering sporadically, would be her first observation point. Parking a block away, she exited the vehicle, senses alert, boots crunching on gravel. Inside, the familiar odor of stale beer, wood polish, and faint cigarette smoke greeted her. She moved slowly, scanning the room systematically, noting the placement of individuals, their postures, gestures, and interactions. The locals occupied corners, laughing quietly, nursing drinks, some in uniform, some not, but all immersed in their routines. Her eyes immediately found him, William Harris. Mid-30s, uniform tidy but showing signs of wear, dark hair slightly tousled, stubble shadowing a tense jaw. His posture spoke of restraint tempered by fatigue, hands clasped around a mug of coffee, fingers tapping a rhythm of unspoken frustration. He exuded alertness and awareness, not the bravado of a corrupt officer, but the weight of someone who had seen the compromises of the system, who had navigated ethical gray zones for years. She seated herself at a nearby table, keeping a casual posture, activating her devices without drawing attention. Every subtle movement, the twitch of an eyebrow, the tension in his shoulders, the way he shifted weight from one foot to the other, was recorded, streamed, time-stamped. She noted micro-expressions that betrayed slight annoyance, fleeting concern, or controlled exasperation. Conversation began with superficial topics: weather, the town's odd traditions, local trivia. William responded cautiously, measured, a man unwilling to disclose too much to a stranger, but giving glimpses of personality, glimpses of internal struggle. When he spoke of the monotony of paperwork, orders that conflicted with his ethics, and the burden of caring for a sick father, Rebekah cataloged everything, noting potential leverage, potential risk, but also registering that he was principled, trapped by circumstances, not inherently corrupt. She ran through mental contingencies. If he became suspicious, how to maintain cover. If someone else entered, how to divert attention. If the evidence needed to be secured instantly, which route to extract it through. Hours passed. Each word, each gesture, each glance was dissected, stored, and analyzed. Her internal processor ran in parallel with the digital one, categorizing the micro-tremors in William's hands as caffeine-induced or adrenaline-suppressed. She felt the dull ache in her own lumbar, the salt of the desert air, itching at her collar, but she compartmentalized the physical strain. In her line of work, empathy was a data point to be analyzed for bias, not a feeling to be followed. Yet the way William looked at the door suggested a man guarding a secret he could no longer carry alone. Occasionally, a fleeting thought of human connection arose. He was principled, capable, aware, but she forced it into containment, a calculation in the matrix of survival and duty. After the bar emptied, she exited into the night, the wind dry and carrying the faint scent of oil fields and desert flora. She walked to her car slowly, reviewing patrol routes, officer interactions, and potential escape paths. At the motel, she cross-checked every uploaded file, verified redundancy, and confirmed timestamps and geolocation metadata. The desert night stretched outside the window, silent and indifferent, yet witness to all she had observed, all she had calculated, and all she had begun to recognize. William Harris was a constant in the chaos, principled but vulnerable, and unknowingly, he had already become a key variable in the outcome of her mission. She lay awake, running through alternative scenarios, plotting contingencies for every eventuality. Someone following her tomorrow, an unexpected patrol pattern, a colleague noticing anomalies, any possible confrontation with corrupt officials. Each scenario was traced, countermeasures prepared, but always, the awareness remained that human unpredictability, his choices, his morality, his decisions, could alter the path of everything she had meticulously planned. And amidst all the calculations, a quiet acknowledgement persisted. She had found a person capable of trust, integrity, and resilience in a landscape otherwise defined by corruption and compromise, a factor that would change the parameters of her mission in ways she could not yet fully anticipate. The next morning, Rebekah returned to the same bar, timing her arrival to coincide with William's shift. She observed from a corner booth, the subtle hum of conversation around her blending with the rhythmic clatter of glasses and low murmurs of local chatter. Her devices continued to feed live data to the cloud, every movement, every word captured, encrypted, and backed up redundantly. William arrived, slightly later than expected, uniform pressed but showing early signs of wear, stains from early duties, a crease in his sleeve from hurried paperwork, tension in the set of his shoulders. He moved with habitual care, scanning the room as if he anticipated trouble, though nothing obvious was present. Rebekah noted the vigilance, the small micro-adjustments in his posture, and the way he maintained awareness of every corner, every entry, every potential observation point. She waited, letting him settle, observing his interactions with colleagues and locals. He spoke with measured caution, teasing lightly where possible, offering small reassurances, yet never overstepping the boundary of propriety. Each conversation, each gesture, was a pattern to be logged, a behavior to be understood, a variable to consider in the larger operation. She approached him cautiously, initiating a conversation designed to seem casual, neutral, yet informative. They exchanged words about the town, the weather, the local economy, and the routines of Border Patrol work, all while Rebekah extracted subtle truths, strained relationships with colleagues, the frustration of bureaucracy, a growing sense of moral fatigue. William revealed, almost reluctantly, his personal burden, his father's medical bills, the weight of providing for him while adhering to orders he sometimes disagreed with, and the quiet, private frustration of a man constrained by duty. Rebekah processed the information, considering not only the operational utility, but also the emotional variable, his humanity, his integrity, and the potential for loyalty or risk in future scenarios. As the day progressed, she followed him discreetly, observing patrol routes, noting deviations, mapping patterns. Every interaction with colleagues was documented, every unusual movement recorded. She began to identify moments of vulnerability in the network, lapses in oversight, subtle signs of corruption, and opportunities for exposure. William noticed minor anomalies too, a van parked too long near the bar, a stranger observing the patrols, but said nothing, internalizing the tension, calculating responses while maintaining composure. Rebekah admired the careful professionalism, noting how he balanced personal ethics against operational risk. By late afternoon, they found themselves outside, walking to their respective vehicles. She tested the boundaries again, casual conversation about safety, patrol efficiency, and minor frustrations. William responded with cautious openness, revealing just enough to gauge her reactions, just enough to allow trust to form incrementally. She sensed the growing mutual awareness, the subtle recognition that they were both navigating not just the physical landscape, but the emotional terrain of trust and suspicion. Back at her motel, she reviewed the day's data meticulously. Every camera angle, every microphone feed, every subtle behavioral cue was cataloged, timestamped, and backed up. She noted potential patterns for exploitation and strategies for mitigating risk. Her mental map of the precinct and the surrounding area grew more detailed, identifying safe routes, alternative extraction points, and emergency contingencies. The evening settled in with a quiet tension. The desert air pressed against the windows, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of oil fields. She ran through scenarios repeatedly. If someone followed her tomorrow, how William might react under pressure, how to secure the evidence in case of confrontation, and which contingencies could be enacted without drawing attention. She allowed herself one brief acknowledgement. William's integrity, vigilance, and subtle humanity were increasingly relevant to her calculations, not as variables alone, but as factors with moral weight, emotional consequence, and potential operational impact. The desert night deepened, and she prepared for tomorrow, aware that every day increased both the risk and the stakes. The careful balance of observation, trust, and survival had begun to shift imperceptibly toward confrontation, and both of them, in their separate but intertwined ways, were moving closer to a collision with the consequences of corruption, deception, and dangerous knowledge. The following days were a calculated escalation. Rebekah continued her discreet surveillance, moving with the precision of someone who knew the cost of a single misstep. Each patrol route William took was logged, every brief interaction scrutinized, and every pattern mapped. She began to notice subtle inconsistencies, unexplained delays, minor procedural violations, whispers among officers, that hinted at the broader corruption she was meant to expose. But the deeper she delved, the more she realized that William was not the corrupt officer she had initially feared. His compromises were born of necessity, providing for his ailing father, paying mounting medical bills, navigating an impossible system. Her assessment shifted, recalibrating the moral equation. Meanwhile, Vargas had become aware of unusual activity. He had noticed her the first time in the bar, the small deviations in patrol schedules, and the way certain files had vanished temporarily from the system. He began observing discreetly, sending trusted men to monitor movements near the precinct and the bar. One afternoon, as Rebekah followed William to a checkpoint on the outskirts of town, she noticed the black SUV parked inconspicuously across the street, a vehicle she had seen in previous reconnaissance but had not tracked in detail. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the clarity of recognition. They were being watched. She whispered to William as they completed the checkpoint duties, careful to maintain casual conversation. "There's someone keeping an eye on us. Be careful tonight." William's gaze flicked toward the SUV. His jaw tightened, and he processed quickly, silently weighing options, contingency routes, and escape points. That evening, back at her motel, she encrypted the day's recordings and uploaded them to the cloud, double and triple checking redundancy. The sense of urgency had shifted from procedural collection to active threat assessment. She could no longer operate purely as an observer. She had to account for the intentions of an intelligent, dangerous antagonist. The tension escalated the next morning when a note slipped under her motel door read simply, "Stop or consequences will escalate." It carried no signature, no direct threat, yet the implication was clear. Vargas knew, and he was deliberate. Rebekah briefed William discreetly during their morning meeting at the bar, carefully balancing openness with operational security. "Vargas is aware. He's tracking patterns, testing reactions. You must be careful. Avoid deviation from routine unless necessary." William's expression hardened, a mixture of controlled fear and resolve. He understood the stakes, his father, his career, and now their lives hung in the balance. That afternoon, while reviewing patrol schedules and recent activity logs, Rebekah identified a critical pattern. Vargas's network relied on predictable behavior. He had gaps in oversight during mid-shift rotations, weak points that could be exploited to gather evidence or create a safe extraction. Together, she and William plotted scenarios, blending her investigative foresight with his operational knowledge. They practiced subtle signals, routes, and contingencies, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Then came the moment that crystallized the danger. During a routine evening patrol, a small commotion erupted near the warehouse district, a deliberate diversion. The black SUV didn't just appear. It cut off their primary retreat path, while two other vehicles shadowed them from the side alleys. Rebekah's peripheral vision caught the tactical spread. Vargas's men weren't just observing. They were executing a pincer movement to funnel them toward the docks. She signaled to William, who recognized the signs immediately. This was no routine patrol or coincidence. Both understood that the confrontation was imminent, that the situation could escalate to lethal force. Rebekah's devices continued to transmit live feeds, ensuring that any aggressive action would be documented and time-stamped. But she remained fully present, calculating risk versus survival, weighing each move with deliberate precision. William positioned himself strategically, hands visible yet ready, scanning the environment for escape routes, cover, and potential threats. Their combined awareness created a tense equilibrium, a moment suspended between exposure and survival, strategy and improvisation. Every second was heavy with consequence. As Vargas emerged from the shadows, his presence dominating and controlled, both Rebekah and William recognized the magnitude of the threat. He spoke with calm authority, his gaze assessing, measuring, and imposing. Yet unlike the theatrical villainy of fiction, his control was rooted in calculated dominance, immediate neutralization of potential threats, assessment of leverage, and precise orchestration of outcomes. The confrontation had begun. Every word, every gesture, every micro-expression would now define survival, trust, and the future of the evidence they had worked so meticulously to collect. The desert night stretched around them, indifferent, silent, but bearing witness to the careful dance of observation, risk, and human endurance that was about to determine life, death, and justice in a place where corruption and courage collided. The warehouse loomed ahead, a massive structure of corrugated steel and shadowed corners, isolated on the edge of town. Rebekah and William approached cautiously, moving along service roads and avoiding well-lit entrances. Every step was deliberate. Every sound, the creak of metal or distant drip of water, was noted. They had no illusions. Vargas would not confront them unprepared. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the metallic scent of machinery, every shadow a potential threat. William signaled for quiet as they entered through a side door, eyes scanning. Boxes stacked high created narrow corridors of concealment. Vargas's men were already positioned, blocking obvious exits. Rebekah's cameras captured every angle, feeding the live cloud feed she had established, ensuring that independent eyes could witness everything if things went wrong. Vargas stepped into the flickering light, his hands empty, but his posture radiating the absolute confidence of a man who owned the air they breathed. He didn't waste energy on a weapon. His two shadows did that for him, their rifles leveled with clinical indifference. "You're good, Rebekah," he said, the use of her real name hitting like a physical blow. "But you forgot that in this town, even the shadows report to me. Your cloud feed is impressive, but it won't matter if there's no one left to hit the publish button." William's stance tightened, one hand near his sidearm, the other relaxed but ready, calculating angles, cover, and escape. He knew he had to balance compliance with protection. Any sudden move could trigger lethal consequences. Rebekah stayed close, body low, eyes on Vargas, mind running contingencies. Every breath, every heartbeat was monitored, measured against potential outcomes. Vargas motioned subtly, and one of his men stepped forward, moving to block her camera feed. Rebekah's heart raced, but she acted with professional precision. A hidden microphone transmitted audio. A subtle light blinked to indicate live feed was secure, ensuring the evidence was being captured even as her line of sight was obstructed. "You don't need to do anything drastic," Vargas continued, eyes locked on William. "Cooperate, and no one gets hurt. Resist, and you know the consequences." William's mind ran rapidly through the options. He could comply superficially while planning a last-moment counter, or risk immediate confrontation with Vargas's men. William tightened his grip on the flashlight in his left hand, his thumb hovering over the strobe switch, a silent signal Rebekah recognized from their drills. As Vargas's lead enforcer lunged to snatch the glasses from her face, William initiated a violent distraction. He didn't just move. He pivoted into the attacker's center of gravity, using a controlled joint lock to spin the man into the line of fire of his partner. It wasn't a brawl. It was a clinical redistribution of threats that forced Vargas's men to hesitate, fearing they would hit their own. The first shot didn't come from William, but from a sniper in the rafters. The bullet shrieked past his ear, shattering a crate of industrial glass. William didn't panic. He dropped into a low crouch, pulling Rebekah behind a heavy steel pillar as he returned fire. Two rhythmic, suppressed cracks aimed at the muzzle flashes above. A searing heat bloomed across his shoulder where a stray fragment had torn through the fabric of his uniform. But the adrenaline acted as a chemical tourniquet, keeping his aim steady and his mind sharp. Rebekah captured everything, every detail, her devices streaming and recording, the cloud feed preserving the entire encounter. Vargas, realizing control was slipping, attempted to retreat toward an exit, but William and Rebekah, coordinated, blocked his path while maintaining defensive positions. "It's over, Vargas," William said, voice steady despite the pain. Rebekah moved beside him, subtly signaling the recording devices to mark the final moments of the confrontation. Vargas was contained, his men either incapacitated or retreating. Every action was documented, every word preserved. As the echoes of the gunfire died down, Rebekah didn't just wait for the police. She initiated a dead man switch protocol. The data wasn't just sent, it was broadcast to a prearranged network of federal prosecutors and 3 major national news outlets simultaneously. This ensured that even if local officials tried to lose the evidence, the chain of custody was already public and immutable. By the time the first local sirens were heard, the FBI's field office in El Paso had already decrypted the first batch of extortion recordings. As law enforcement began arriving, guided by the secure instructions Rebekah had dispatched, William and Rebekah stepped back, catching their breath, acknowledging the gravity of what had occurred. The danger was not entirely gone. Vargas had influence and networks, but the immediate confrontation had ended in their favor. The desert outside the warehouse was silent once more, indifferent, holding the echoes of calculated risk, courage, and precise coordination. Both understood that the next hours would determine consequences, accountability, and whether justice would follow. They exited together, not as heroes in a story, but as professionals who had survived a carefully calculated confrontation, each aware of the personal costs and the fragile victory they had earned. The morning after the warehouse confrontation, the desert light cut sharply across the town, illuminating the aftermath of a night that would leave permanent traces in memory, law, and conscience. Rebekah and William sat in a rented sedan on the edge of town, observing quietly as black and white police vehicles swept the precinct and surrounding streets. Through encrypted channels, Rebekah had ensured that all recordings, timestamps, and logs reached a trustworthy, independent investigative unit with jurisdiction beyond Vargas's local influence. Every file was verified, cross-checked, and stored securely. The evidence could withstand scrutiny in court. William's shoulder throbbed from the shallow graze he had received, a constant reminder of the fine line between calculated engagement and mortal danger. He flexed cautiously, feeling both the pain and the relief that he had acted decisively, without overextending beyond his capabilities. Rebekah handed him a bottle of water, and their hands brushed briefly. Neither made a gesture beyond that, yet the unspoken acknowledgement was clear. Survival, trust, and partnership had solidified in moments of extreme risk. News of Vargas's arrest broke quietly at first, then spread through local channels. He had been taken into custody without incident, the independent unit presenting irrefutable evidence of corruption, coercion, and multiple violations. His men were being questioned, and the network he had relied upon began to unravel. The financial fallout for William was neutralized with the same precision as the raid. Rebekah leveraged her agency's legal defense fund to reclassify his prior cooperation with Vargas as an active, deep-cover whistleblowing operation. This legal pivot allowed his father to be transferred to a high-tier federal veterans facility, where the costs were fully covered by the state as part of a witness protection protocol, stripping Vargas of his last bit of leverage. Rebekah had coordinated the arrangements, maintaining operational security while safeguarding the human element of her mission. The tension of the past days slowly gave way to planning for the future. The legal resolution for William wasn't a mere dismissal, but a strategic resignation. Under the weight of the evidence Rebekah provided, federal investigators granted him full immunity in exchange for his testimony against the remaining precinct leadership. His record wasn't just cleared, it was sealed. He walked away not as a disgraced officer on leave, but as a protected key witness who had successfully navigated a moral minefield, trading his badge for a clean slate and the chance to start over without the shadow of a prison sentence hanging over his head. Rebekah continued her professional responsibilities, ensuring that the published investigation adhered to journalistic ethics and legal standards. She reviewed the material one last time, confirming that every detail, every nuance of the events was represented accurately, that justice would be served without exaggeration or fabrication. Several months later, the desert heat had softened to the gentler warmth of early spring. William and Rebekah met quietly outside the courthouse, their presence unremarkable yet profoundly significant. They moved with measured care to the sedan, side by side, a quiet acknowledgement of shared history, calculated risk, and mutual understanding. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had reclaimed agency over their lives, choosing to leave the town and the shadow of Vargas behind. As they drove away, the vast expanse of West Texas stretched endlessly, the horizon a blend of heat shimmer and distant mountains, a landscape now symbolizing both freedom and the enduring consequences of courage. Their conversation was minimal, not from distance, but from the understanding that words were unnecessary. Trust had been tested, lives had been weighed against principle, and survival had been secured through a combination of calculated skill, unwavering professionalism, and moral clarity. Rebekah glanced at William, noting the subtle lines of fatigue softened by resolve, the quiet steadiness in his gaze. She knew that their lives were now intertwined not by chance, but by necessity, courage, and choice. The desert passed silently outside, indifferent and vast, yet bearing witness to a story of careful planning, precise execution, and human resilience. Justice had been served, lives had been preserved, and both Rebekah and William had emerged transformed, not unscathed, but intact, capable of facing a future defined by agency, conscience, and the enduring bonds formed under extraordinary circumstances.